You know, there's something thought-provoking about seashore or lakeshore, I think. I'm reminded, maybe it's because when one is by a great body of water, one can never be completely surrounded by the works of man, by the noises and the distractions that these works tend to create. I'm reminded of the little book, Burlington Garden of Canada, which the Historical Society and the museum, Brant Museum, are bringing out as a centennial project next year. When Martha Craig wrote her introduction to that book, she speaks of hundreds of thousands of fruit trees and the scent of the blossoms in the air and so on. But she wasn't in an orchard when she wrote it. She wasn't even inland. She was standing on the shore of Burlington Bay, looking out towards Hamilton Heights. The landscape she would see, of course, would be somewhat different from the one that we see.
Contours in the land, all that's left of Brant's Pond, the bar, and so many other areas of old Burlington. Now they exist only on historical maps and in memories.
And we used to dance on there was a dance hall on the top, you know, without a roof. We used to dance up there. Moonlight nights, it was just gorgeous.
Two first boats were the Macassa and the Majeska, and they came in and took passengers. And then they carried their fruit down, and they must have made another run down at night with fruit. They got enough fruit to make it worthwhile making a trip, carry it down as freight, because they had to be back here at 8 o'clock the next morning, you see, to run a passenger load down. And they left Toronto at 5, and we're in here, 7:30 or 8. And then they loaded up the fruit again and made another trip.
Few people know of Burlington's shipping operations, where fresh fruit was loaded and sent off to the big market, Toronto, 35 miles down the lake. Fewer people still are aware that part of the legacy remains, and these foundations of Baxter's Wharf, at the end of Brant Street. How much of the town's past is still here, all around us, quietly succumbing to time, to decay, to progress? More than we know, more than even memories can tell us. The old Moraine House, once located on Brant Street. Whatever happened to it? It was moved to Lakeshore Boulevard, where it can be seen today. Its pioneer lines changed very little. The Ghent family, descendants of United Empire Loyalists, built their Burlington home reflecting the Victorian influence of its era. And today it reflects the craftsmanship of 19th century builders. And what of the Queen's Hotel, where salesmen traded yarns in the downstairs dining room and tourists raved about the grand view of Lake Ontario? It's still there, and so is the view. But the salesmen and their wares and their yarns have long disappeared. Elgin Harris may remember some of the stories, however. He has no difficulty recalling the housing boom in Burlington during the 1890s and the value a man got for his dollar then.
I built my first home down there for $1,900. It's still there. I built that office for $400. Yeah, that's what it cost. Niagara Power Line come along and I had to get off of it. And that's when I went down there where the carpet place is.
Wellington Square was a busy place. John Waldy, Burlington's first mayor, owned this general store at the corner of Lakeshore Road and John Street. You can still see the old Thompson home on Ontario Street, with its typically Victorian architectural style. And St. Luke's Church, with its view of the lake, framed by pines and its wooden timbers bearing witness to all the activities of a small community church. Baptisms, marriages, deaths, sermons, and crises. Look around you today and think of things as they were 100 years ago, in days when summers were longer and lazier, in days when brick buildings like this one stood all along Brant Street. 100 years to build memories, just a few days to be reduced to rubble. These were days, too, when the intersection of the Guelph Line and Lakeshore Road was known as Port Nelson. Today, if you look carefully along the lake shore, you'll find the date of the construction of a retainer wall built to serve this thriving little community. And if you look with the inquisitiveness of children, you may find the remains of locally manufactured pottery and glass pieces, buried treasure to be recovered and cleaned and proudly carried home. North along the Guelph Line, at the intersection of what is now Number 5 Highway, was the village of Nelson, originally known as Hannahsville. The Nelson House was an important overnight stop in the long stagecoach journey from Toronto to Brantford. And along the highway, the 150-year-old St. John's Church stands, still as severely Anglican in its lines as the day it was constructed, and one thinks just as sturdily built. Life in Nelson in the mid-1800s may not have been exactly comfortable by our standards, but the settlers could have done much worse, and they knew it. Or so Thomas Hunt did when he wrote back to England about 1850.
We are in a good country for poor folks. We have plenty of good fire and grog. We make our own sugar, our own soap and candles, and bake good light bread. We shall never want for water or timber. It is called the healthiest place in Canada.
The healthiest place in Canada was also the residence of the Ireland family, whose home, patterned after an English country squire's house, was the showplace of Nelson. It is one of the oldest structures in what is now Burlington, and was a source of remembrances for the late George Ireland, a descendant of the original builder.
The more careful you were in the training of the horse, the better workhorse you had when it was once trained. And horses trained differently too. One horse would train much easier than another one.
George Ireland and his father before him and his father's father were among the people who helped settle the land in what is now Burlington. Though the Irelands may be noted for their impressive farmhouse, Paul Fisher is surely undisputed apple-growing king of the area. Remember the old Fisher home, where the Burlington Mall now stands.
I came home from college in 11. I started to plant in 1912. And from 12 to 16, I planted about 100 acres of orchard. And I came home from World War I and planted another 100. You had to choose your varieties. There were a multitude of old varieties and a few new ones coming in. You had to choose what you were going to. That depended some on where you were going to market them, whether you wanted to have many what we called summer apples, fall apples, or winter apples. And you had to choose the percentage you wanted of each. Great many people didn't plant any summer apples. They were only planted fairly close to Toronto, where the shipping to Toronto, which was the big market, wasn't too, it was fairly easy and cheap. Fall apples were planted more generally, and then the winter apples were the big crop.
Growing fine apples in the days before modern sprays and equipment took skill and know-how, but then so did packing the ripe fruit.
Enough apples to make one layer in your barrel. You know, you got them all to pick and put down in, you might say by hand. You can jump a few down, but so as not to bruise them. When you reach down in a barrel, just like reaching down there, you drop your apple down, or it'll be bruised. And then after that, you can dump your apples from the top of the barrel down. Well, you don't dump them from the top. You put your peel down in as far as you can, and then dump it. And bring it up that way. Then you finish your top off the same way. You keep shaking your barrel after each peel up. In some cases, you used to use a paper pad on the top of the apple, and then your lid goes on the top of that, you see. Your lid goes down, sits down just inside of your other. There's the two upper rings that go around the barrel are always loose. You tap them up a little bit so your barrel spreads out. And when you come to put your head in, you put it in, and there's a ridge that goes over.
And while apple barrels may be gone, pecking ripe fruit by hand is still with us. So many things were done by hand back then, including spending cold days in Burlington Bay, stockpiling ice for the coming summer.
It's very interesting, the ice cutting. Oh, it was a big operation. There were an awful lot of people hauled ice. It was a big operation. There'd be 40, 50 teams down there at a time to load up with ice on the bay. And several gangs cutting. They sawed it into chunks about 3 foot square. And then whatever depth they were. We never hauled it less than about, maybe 15 inches. But very seldom is usually 18 to 24 inches. Occasionally, when we got very cold, why, we'd get a little more than 24 inches thick. We dearly loved it when we could do it on sleighs. We did hate it when we had to do it on wheels. But 3/4 of the time, anyway, we could do it. Had enough snow to do it on. And then, see, the team could jog along very easily on with the sleigh. And it wasn't easy to jog along with the old lumber wagon over the rough road. But the sleigh, you see, the road was all smoothed out when we got snow, and so the team would just jog along, the bells ringing merrily, and everybody happy.
Zimmerman. You'll find the name in an old church on Appleby Line, in dusty archives of the area, and in the boyhood memories of Paul Fisher, to whom Zimmerman meant a Saturday morning routine trip to a busy grist mill.
Saturday morning, I had to take the load of feed to the mill to get it chopped. So this was my Saturday morning job. I'd usually get back about 12 or half past. I either went to Zimmerman or to Waterdown. There was oats to be rolled for the horses. We didn't like the chopping for horses. We got them rolled. But for cattle feed, it was nearly always mixed.
Like so many other Ontario towns, Zimmerman had grown and blossomed around the site of the mill. And like so many others, when the mill closed down, the village itself withered and died. 12 Mile Creek runs free once more, past concrete dam abutments and rusty sluice gate hinges that once harnessed its energy. But Zimmerman may live on as the name of a proposed nearby recreational park, as engineers and town planners study its potential. Further downstream, 5 busy mills once stood at Tansley, a village located where the creek flows under number 5 highway. The remains are still there, just around this bend, crumbling and becoming more and more overgrown season by season. Time moves on, but in one fascinating corner of the Burlington area, it has almost stood still. Dakota, along what is now Cedar Springs Road. On a hot summer's day, 2 boys feed a friendly groundhog alongside a mill race, which powers a century-old grist mill. In past years, the mill has been operated by families like the Gages, the Harveys, the Kirkwoods, and the Bennetts, Eckers, and Eatons. Today, the miller is George Pegg. The mill is his livelihood, still driven by the running waters of 12 Mile Creek, still attracting local farmers who prefer its natural flour to any bleached and bagged product found in the supermarkets.
The first fall I was here, I run the chopping mill myself.
In a home down the road, children watch a travelogue of Egypt in a color television set. 5 miles above us, a passenger jet turns toward Europe. Right here and now, things are as they were when Burlington was still called Wellington Square, and a railway to Vancouver was little more than an election promise.
Not every day. Well, they used to just charge so much a bag, but when my dad was here, he changed it to so much 100. Had to weigh it all. I'm supposed to be charging by the 100, but there's lots of them who's in there with 10 bags, and I'll never bother weighing it all, just chop.
Charge him $1 on that shit.
If I think it weighs more than 100 pounds of the bag, I might charge them $1.10 or $1.20, and sometimes I charge them $1 and it maybe don't weigh 100. There ain't many coming now. Going 9 rounds a minute now, the outside of that's traveling pretty fast.
Oh, yeah.
It'll run a little faster than that if you don't put any work on it. Just let the water pour onto it, it'll go faster than that. You gotta hold it back to get the power. Get the weight of water. It'll just run the speed the water will drop. And there's no work on it. You hold it back to about, I think it's 9 rounds a minute I timed it at. Just all the wheel will carry is all you can give it. If you give it any more than that, it don't do any good. people from pipe come up and water run, they'd come there and get drinking water to take to their houses. I think everybody in Kilbride carried water from there at that time. But they don't now. They've got wells of their own. And there's a few of them carry water from there yet.
Dakota, Kilbride, Lowville. How much longer will they retain their identity before joining Zimmerman and Freeman and Appleby in obscurity? Perhaps names and identities will remain as long as a definite spirit remains in the community, like the spirit of the Lowville United Church Youth Choir. Alongside 12 Mile Creek in Lowville is a remarkably restored grist mill owned by Mr. Norm Wright. The mill has been converted into a finely appointed residence, tastefully decorated in early Canadian style by Mrs. Wright. And the power of the stream is now harnessed to drive not millstones, but a 25,000-watt AC generator, providing sufficient electrical energy for the Wright family's needs. It's a kind of independence from hydro wires and gas lines that most of us can only try to imagine. Burlington once was a stop on the line of the Hamilton Radial Electric Railway Company. It was pollution-free, cheap 25 cents return from Burlington to Hamilton, and convenient. The line ran along the beach strip, up Maple Avenue to Elgin Street, and across Brant Street to what is now Lions Club Park. The perfect rapid transit system. Unfortunately, it wasn't very rapid. 15 miles per hour was its top hair-raising speed. But on a warm summer's day, with your favorite girl along, blushing under a parasol, who cared how long it took? The radial cars ran from 1897 to 1929. And many local old-timers swear that commuting hasn't been as good since. What's left of the radial line? Some of the right-of-way, much of it now used by hydro towers. The remains of bridge abutments along stretches of New Street, where the lines once continued to Oakville. No area of what is now Burlington retained a greater sense of individual identity than Aldershot, in spite of the fact that it was never incorporated as a village. Essentially a farming area, Aldershot has, since the Second World War, developed into one of the most densely populated and desirable residential sections in all of Burlington. In case you wondered, this unique section of Aldershot, called Birdland, evolved as a result of a bird sanctuary established along Shoreview Road by the Philman family, one of the early settlers of the region. Nellie Moraine has seen so much of the change to Burlington and its surroundings, lived so much, learned so much.
I had an old friend. She was a dressmaker down in Carnda's store for years and years, and she came to see me. She had Parkinson's disease. And she came in one day and she sat down behind the table and she said to me, "I'm going to give you some advice, Nellie." I said, "All right, Minnie, what's the matter?" She said, "Grow old gracefully." She said, "You know, when I was 70, I lived like a girl 16. She'd go to the dances and dance every dance."
How gracefully is Burlington growing old? At 100 years, perhaps we're at the awkward age, where our high-rise apartments look down upon our market gardens, where a man can plow a mean furrow and go home to a split-level housing complex. Where farm homes are shadowed not by elms, but by apartment balconies. Where links with the past include actual gas lamps and charming Victorian architecture. Where Burlington's first industry, a pickle factory, is still in use as part of the Niagara Chemicals Industrial Complex. Where school children consider Canada's centennial year as ancient history, and their counterparts of the last century as somehow fictional, strange gray faces that gaze soberly back at the Burlington they could never imagine. Wellington Square, Zimmerman, Dakota, Nelson, Freeman. 100 years ago, they were rural villages in a nation held together by little more than a railroad and a thin thread of allegiance to the British Crown. Look on it today as thriving and prosperous and successful. And think for a moment of its roots, that are still seen so deeply in the eyes of memory.